Here we go. All sorted. Right, hopefully you can see me on the big spotlight thing. So you can all see me nice and large. So yeah, hello everyone again. Third time with you, which is awesome. However, I'm starting to run out of ideas now, right? So give me till the new year for the next one. Right, I've gone over my notes from the past couple of sessions, and back in April, we looked at template flies, so we could pretty much take those patterns and, if we change the color, the size, then we can, cover a wide range of, invertebrates or fly patterns themselves. We covered March Brown Emerger, we covered Paradons, all that nice stuff. The last session then back in August was about small flies and micros, all right, which is a bit of fun. Talked about some books there as well and all that good stuff. And then this time around, I thought what I'd do to just make things a little different, because obviously we've covered pretty much all the patterns that I tie, right? But what I thought this time around, we'd talk about not just fly patterns, but small stream fishing, which I kind of touched on way back in the first session. Excuse me. Too much talking today. So this time around, small stream fishing, I'll cover 3-4 flies if we get time. And so as some of you know, I mainly fish the River Usk. Excuse me 1 second. Good. Too much talking today. That's the problem. So mainly fish the River Usk, and also the Mono, and then there's a few surrounding rivers as well that I fish. They're usually larger bodies of water, where you've got to look for your fish, whether you're looking for obstructions, all that sort of stuff. But they're larger rivers, right? But what I also have a big passion for is small stream fishing. So these are and being in South Wales, we're sort of in the foothills of the Beacons as well. So the amount of small streams really is well, they're everywhere, right? So we've got small streams feeding into the bigger rivers, the Usk, the Taff, the Wye, and they're awesome, right? I mean, but you're talking quite small bodies of water. They're quite aggressive in the way that they, there's maybe pool after pool after pool, but you can look upriver, and generally the angle of the river is quite steep, because of course you're actually fishing up into the hills, right? So they're quite narrow, they're quite overgrown. There's a lot of hiking maybe to get into some of them. Once you're in is what I tell people, because you've got to scramble down quite a steep slope. But I mean, at the start of the year, they're quite open in terms of overhead trees and things like that, because the trees haven't blown out just yet. So really, I mean, when we talk about gear as well, people always think, oh, you've got to use a 6-foot rod or a 7-foot rod, which, okay, yes, for what I like to use during the maybe the late spring, summer months. But really, you can still get away with a 9-foot rod early season. And generally speaking, as I say, the fish are usually a bit smaller, all right? So they're not going to be the size that, the brutes that you're going to get on the main stems. The smaller tribs then are sort of, if you catch a pound trout, then, that's a really good fish. But of course, on a 2-weight rod it makes things a bit interesting, and, you can feel that bend down into handle sometimes. So great environments. They can be a bit tough on the knees and the back, because constantly having to climb over trunks or underneath branches. And for the most part, I mean, these trout, they don't really spook too easily, not like the main stem, or rather, sorry, the other way around. Main stem, they kind of see a lot of anglers. They get more pressure, right? So if they see an angler, okay, they might drop down in the column and then just go off the feed. But with the small streams, you will see them dart. You put a foot in the wrong place, or you enter a pool a bit loudly, and boom, gone, and you can see them actually darting away. And then right, okay, just move on to the next pool. you've spooked that one. So yeah, it's all good fun. As I say, I personally wear like brush cutting pads, so it covers your knees, gives you good knee pads, and also a shin guard as well. So you know, if you're crawling around on your knees, you don't want to be wrecking your waders, which you kind of do most part, because again, these small streams are more built up. They don't get the you know, the nice strimmed banks that some of the other larger beats get. So yeah. Fly pattern wise, then I'm going to go back to, you know, my general ethos, really, just to keep things simple, right? Again, I kind of start every demo with that ethos, really. Keep things simple, kiss, whatever. If you want to reference it, then just, you know, and again, because these are small streams, in the summer, you're gonna have loads of overhanging hanging branches. Your casting needs to be a bit tighter, so you need to tighten the loops a little bit to really get a good fast turnover to present your fly. Because, and again, with the flies, keep them simple again, because you know you're going to be losing flies. If you need to make that cast to a tricky position, then it might be underneath a branch, over a branch, by the side of a branch. You know, there's going to be things to catch your flies on and eventually lose them. So nice, simple, quick to tie patterns work better for me, because I don't want to be, you know, losing them in a tree and, you know, spend half an hour on a pattern or whatever. So nice and simple. So we'll cover a couple of patterns today. Clinkhammer, CdC and Elk, which I've gone through before, but these are my sort of go-to staples for small streams. And then a direct, or an animal. This is a Norwegian pattern, Great Caddis pattern, just to show you the difference between like a CdC and Elk and another type of caddis, right? And then lastly, for those who know me, I don't really nymph, right? Through the season, from April onwards, I'll generally stick to dries, because that's what I enjoy. Nothing wrong with nymphs at all, but it's, yeah, I prefer to sit, wait for a hatch to happen, or search out rising fish. So a lot of early season stuff, I'll just walk. But on the small streams, you haven't got that ability sometimes, because you're in a pool. There might not be a bank to walk on as such, because they're very steep. You're not going to walk the bank. You're going to walk the entire stretch of river for maybe a couple of miles before you can even get out. So you need to be careful with your wading. If you're looking at a pool, it looks pretty good, then you're going to have riffles, runs. Could be a slowish pool, but generally, for the most part, these are quite steep. So there's going to be crashing pools and big rocks and stuff like that to look at. So I will use a nymph, and I'll tie a nymph today as well. And it's my go-to. Again, you can bash a load of these out really quick and easy. Just a gold-ribbed hazier. Yeah, we'll have a look at those two. So without further ado, then we'll have a look at the first one, and that's a Clinkhammer, right? So this kind of works well with the nymph. Okay, so I'll use a Clinkhammer on its own. Quite a large pattern. I'll switch the camera in a second. Great searching pattern. All right. Again, there's small bodies of water, these small streams. So the trout are only going to be in, you know, I'm wading through maximum of maybe, I don't know, to my thigh. And that's generally the head of a pool when I'm sort of having to jump over a weir or a bunch of rocks to get up into the next pool. Generally speaking, the back end and middle parts of the pool are going to be from shin to maybe knee deep. So my thinking really is, with any dry fly, they're going to see it. They haven't got to rise too far in the column. So it's not as if they've got to come up 10 foot to take it. And likewise, if I'm fishing the nymph, then, and maybe things are a little bit cold, start of the season, there's not much invertebrate stuff coming off, then I'll opt to maybe just add on maybe 1.5 foot of tippet to the bend of the shank of my Clinkhammer, and then fish the nymph off the bend. All right, so it's a, you know, a trailing duo, clink and dink, whatever you want to call it, New Zealand style, whatever. And it works well. And then as the day warms up, obviously you've got a bit more, you know, the fish are warmed up slightly. There's more invertebrates coming off, so you can then really focus on dries. But they don't really, in my streams anyway, they don't tend to get too picky about flies. Any specific, they don't tend to lock on to a specific species or hatch because they just want all the food, right? They haven't got the I suppose the easy lifestyle of their brothers and sisters on the main stems. If they see food, they've got to grab it because it's coming down generally quite fast. So they'll use smash and grab tactics to just eat it first, think second. And more often than not, I've seen fish, that have regurgitated twigs, sticks, all sorts, right? And if it looks like food, again, back to what we were talking with, guess or general impression of shape and size, then they'll grab it, guaranteed, right? As long as you don't spook them. And that's, again, the biggest key that I come back to with all fishing, certainly on small streams. You spook them, move on, go to the next pool, of which there are generally loads, right? So we'll have a look at the first fly then. I'll change my camera, 2 seconds. If this works tonight. There we go. This was zooming in on my shirt on Tuesday, so hopefully, yeah, you can see that. Right, so this is my favorite clink hammer hook, right? Just so happens to be called the clink hammer. The Partridge 15BNY, right? It's the barbless version, and it was designed to be the perfect clink hammer hook, right? Nice long profile. Again, this is an emerging caddis, or it was designed to be the emerging caddis. A nice long profile, and it works well. Generally, I think I think I mentioned this previously, that Hans van Klinken, the original designer of this, I don't think he classes anything under an 8 to be a true clink hammer. They're just small emerging parachutes, right, or paradons, whatever you want to call them. He fishes them huge, right, and that's my thumb, and this is a size 10. It's about the standard I go to, because one, I want to fish it on its own, like an attractor pattern. I want to try and bring them up, and this really does bring them up as well. It's my go-to for early season, and likewise, it'll support quite easily a nymph as well. So we'll tie the nymph a little bit later on, and you'll see the size we use there as well. Okay, so without further ado, then I'm going to use. I'll just grab my thread. And this again is Semperfli Nano Silk. Okay, so I'll just pop my glasses on. Eyes are struggling today. Okay, so this is the 18-aught, as I say quite often. I use the 18-aught quite a lot. Just does it all for me. When I do the deer hair stuff in a bit, then we'll probably switch to 12. So what I'm doing is sort of laying a base that I'm going to put my wing post in next. Okay, so what I'm doing, I've laid a little base, and then I'm parking my thread where I want my post to be. Okay, and I'm using Semperfli Polyon in yellow for this one. It's just the one I've got on the desk, so I'm just going to use yellow. But I generally go for orange and pinks. You can see these at distance as well. But I mean, on small streams, you're not fishing at distance really. One, you've got so many conflicting currents that to fish at distance, your fly line and your fly is going to be dragging all over the place, right? So generally, a rod's length or rod and a half, 2 max, is the distance that I'll tend to fish. And again, I'm down low on my knees, right? So I'm just generally just flicking the dry up, or if there's a nymph on as well, then there's generally more to go wrong. So I'm just going to take it under and up. Okay, I'm just going to park it on top of the shank. Okay, so I'm just using the bobbin to hold that in place. Okay, and I'm just going to make sure that's nicely on top. I'm just going to give it a pull up, 1, 2, and then lift this back post forward, and then park my thread behind, right? And then just make sure that's all on top nicely, and I'll take the full lot, and I will start wrapping up. I'll move the camera in a second. It's a better aspect. On Tuesday night, it was looking down my shirt, so I suppose you'd prefer to see the fly rather than my chest. So I'll move the camera back in a second. Let me just catch up with this bit. So again, I'm just touching turns all the way up the post. If you use a 12-aught, you can get to the top quicker. I'm using an 18-aught, so Too much pressure at this point is just going to pull all your thread wraps off this post. So go slow. So yeah, then touch and turns all the way back down. And then what we need to do is start locking that post off. So at the moment, it's going to swing right around the shank, right? So we need to start locking that off now. So we'll do turns in behind and in front. Okay. So what we're doing, we're starting to put pressure on both sides to lock that in place. And with any sort of gel spun thread or GSP, which, you know, the nano silk is, then you're gonna get a bit of slip and slide, right? So it's important at this phase, you lock that in nice and tight. Otherwise, it's just gonna, when you come to tying the hackle on, or if you put too much pressure on when you're on the river, then again, you could get a bit of slippage. The whole thing's gonna wrap around the shank. So now I'm just gonna start a taper, right, back and forth up to the post. So I'm forming like a oh, I don't know, like a bookend, really, both sides. I used to say it was like those sides, you know, those like Amazonian rainforest with the huge butts on the end, on the bottom, huge wide things, just to lock it in place. There you go, and that's not going to go nowhere. Good, right. So there's the base. Okay, very little build up because I'm using the nano silk again, so it's going to take care of itself for me. There's that zip, and next we're going to put in our hackle. Right. So again, this one is just on the desk, right? So this is a Cree, but it's about the same. It's about the size that I want. So generally for my clinks, what I'll do, I'll measure it, and what I want the feather to be is about the same length as the hook, right? So about the same, maybe even a bit longer, right? Again, the fish aren't going to care too much for this, as you can see. That's pretty much bang on. So I'm just going to tidy up the end. And with the thread in the front, I'm just going to offer that up. Tie that in with one loose wrap. And I'm just going to, all I'm going to do again, I'm just going to use the tension of the bobbin to hold that in place. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take I'm going to look at the hackle itself, and I'm going to take the lowermost hackle fiber, and I'm just going to pull that just above the top of the post, so that when I come to the hackle, when I drop it down and start wrapping around, the idea is I'm not going to get any hackle fibers pointing directly up. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The fish isn't going to see it, but and then in touch and turns, I'm going to wrap all the way up to the top of the post, and then all the way back down. Okay. Good. Right, so that's tied in. Now I could snip the butt end off, but what can sometimes happen when you start putting pressure on wrapping your hackle, you can pull that straight out. But also, we're going to incorporate that into the body, right? So we're going to just bend that back, and we can actually start to use that as part of the taper on this fly. There we go. Right, because this is quite a long, extended shank curved hook, I'm just going to turn that in the vise ever so slightly. It just makes it easier for my tying. And that's the one thing with saddle hackles, is they are quite long, they get in the way. So I'm just going to bring that back to about there. Okay.
Gareth, sorry to interrupt.
Of course, mate. No, go for it.
Keep an eye on the participants. Willie McCutcheon's going to be trying to join on his laptop in a minute.
Gotcha. I haven't got any pop-ups yet, but I'll keep an eye.
Okie doke. Cheers.
Again, I'm just laying a bit of thread for start building that taper as we go. The main bit of taper I'm going to get is from the dubbing itself, which I'm going to bring in a minute. So about there, I'm going to put in a rib. Okay, this is, if you can see that, Perdigon body. Is that going to focus? Iridescent blue. We're going to have a black body with a nice sort of blue rib. It gives a nice sort of attractor look to it. It's a nice trigger for these fish. So I'm just going to pull the length off there. And we're just going to tie that in. Now, more often than not, to be honest, guys, this you get a trout tooth on it, and it may fray. So this is totally personal. If you want to tie it in and do, if not, I don't think there's it matters either way. Okay, so we're going to take that right back down, park that out of the way, and I'm just going to move that in a vise just ever so slightly again. Now I'm going to get right. So you can sort of tie the if you're going to use dubbing, yeah, you could. So you could use stripped quill. You could cover it in UV. You could use natural dubbing. I'm going to use a synthetic dubbing, right? And the reason for that is I'm fishing these through really fast water sometimes. So I don't want, although I want the butt to pierce the surface, right? Because it's an emerger, so I want that in or just under. But at the same time, I don't want too much natural material in there because that's just going to absorb a lot of water, right? Well, that's my thinking anyway. So I want it to pierce the film, but I don't want it to eventually or potentially drag the fly down. Okay, so I want it to be as buoyant as possible because again, at some stage, I might be supporting a nymph through it. So I'm going to use like a superfine. This one's the Semperfli superfine dubbing, and again, color. Yeah, I'm my thoughts on color. As long as it matches, whatever you want to either match in terms of caddis, or it could be black for maybe a terrestrial, whatever, and it's totally up to you, right? But I'm just going to use black again. It's a nice sort of suits the goes well rather with the blue sort of rib. So I'm just going to enter that on, form a dubbing rope, sorry. Just offer that up. So I'm just going to take, notice where my thread is. It's not actually at the butt yet. So I'm just going to do a couple of wraps just to catch it in. And then because I want the butt end of the fly to be quite tight and obviously then come up and start to taper. Now I'm going to put a bit of pressure on it and twist it. So it makes it a little tighter. Hopefully you can see. There we go. So what I'm going to do now is start dubbing that forward. And hopefully I'm going to get a nice-ish taper. So take time as you go. If you need to a little bit back off, we'll move that back in the voice slightly. And get that long saddle hackle out of the way if you need to. And that'll do. Nice couple of wraps just to park your thread, and we're done. So I'm just going to take that rib now, and I'm just going to counterwind. And again, if you wanted to give a bit more security, then you could have parked your thread at the very bottom and then ribbed over the top with your very fine thread. That works well to preserve your rib. Okay, so we'll tie that off.
Do you need anything? Sorry.
We're all good, thanks. Okay, so that is looking good. So I kind of want to slim enough so that it pierces the surface, right? But not too thick that it's just gonna, take on a ton of water. But what we'll do in a bit, we'll trim that as well, just to make we take off maybe the spiky bits. I mean, a spiky body sometimes works quite well, but at the same time, again, I want it to pierce, right? Pierce the film. So that's the reason in there. Now, again, next up for the thorax, yeah, you can use anything you want, right? Again, you can dub it, you can use whatever. I always like the way peacock herl looks. So I'm just going to grab my natural peacock herl, and I'm going to take 3 fibers. So bear with me a second while I sort these out. 1, 2, 3. Right, so I'm just going to sort the tips of these out. So again, peacock herl, it can be quite fragile and brittle sometimes. The nature spirit stuff is awesome, to be fair. It's always pretty strong. But what we're going to do, I'm just going to catch that in, and I'm just going to draw that back. Again, I don't want any lumps or bumps. So I'm just going to tie it in there. And then for security, as I'm sure you all do, we're just going to twist it, right? So we form a rope of peacock herl. So again, you're not, if one was to fray, then the other's going to be caught in behind it. So I'm just going to bring that forward, and I'm just going to start to build my thorax. Again, use hackle pliers if you prefer. Again, I'll turn this and add the light on in a second. And then when you're ready and you get to behind the eye, we'll just tie that off. Just a couple of lock-in wraps in front. And then we're ready to snip. So I've got the security in there, and it's a nice sort of, spiky body, right? Hopefully you can see that okay. So at this point, I am going to just tie off. This is the way I like to tie clinks. It just makes it a bit easier, I find, for me, right? So if you want to tie the hackle in at this point, then you go for it. So that's the body and everything done. So let me just zoom in on that. So I've got everything I want. Nice sort of slim body. So I'm just gonna give this a little bit of a tidy up. Again, I want this to pierce the surface, right? Any straggly bits might prevent that. But again, I do like the effect on some of the hazier, spikier bodies. They're pretty cool looking. Okay, so I'm just going to move this in the vise so that the post now is more horizontal. Just makes it a little bit easier to tie on. Okay, so I'm just going to enter my thread back in. And again, this is the reason, right, I use the 18/0 thread, because it is very, very fine. And as I mentioned in one of my previous demos, what we've actually got on here is, if you remember, we touch and turned up the post, then back down to form the post. Then we tied in our hackle, right? So we went up to the top again and back down. So that's 4 layers of thread and the stem of a hackle. And now I'm tying in at the top and winding down. So that's actually 5 layers of thread, right? Which with maybe a 12/0 sort of traditional thread, like a wound wax type thread, it's just going to be too thick, right? And again, those threads, because they're more natural makeup, then again they'll take on water, right? So again, I love natural ingredients or materials, but at the same time, they've got their downsides too. Like just as the same as the downsides, synthetics have their downsides too. So what I'm going to do is just sort this post out, and I'm going to start to wrap now our hackle. Okay, so touch and turn. So we're going to go all the way down to the base, and you'll know when you get there because they'll start kicking up. If you got any pointing down, just make sure that your hackle goes under them. I think that's about it. At this point, I'm just going to give it one turn over the top, another turn, a lock-in wrap underneath. Okay, at this point, it's either where it goes very wrong, right, or very wrong. So I'm going to snip at this point, and then we're going to give it a whip finish. Now, personally, I use my fingers in this one to do a whip finish. So earlier when I tied off behind the eye, I used a whip finish tool. Now, because you've got all this stuff in the way, personally for me, it's just a bit easier to do a hand whip finish. So I'm just going to do loose wraps over the top. I'll explain why in a second. I'm just going to take the slack, pop a needle in, and then draw up. The reason I said loose wraps is because you're tying with a synthetic thread. What can happen if you put too much pressure on, the wraps that you've sort of in your whip finish will actually sort of bite into that layer of thread, and then when you draw it through, it'll just catch on that little notch that's been created. So it's important there to put the right amount of pressure on. So I'm just going to give it a bit of a cleanup. Now in one of my previous demos, I think when we did a paradon, I talked about making them quite sparse by stripping one side of the feather. With this, I'm not too bothered because I want all of the hackle fibers just to keep that afloat, right? So again, I'm just going to give that a bit of a tidy. Just drop that down so you can see. So there we go. And again, so pull the hackle post up. Okay, and then I'm just going to give it a nice snip. Generally, my go-to is about the same length as the hackle itself, or the hackle fibers. There you go. So that's the buoyant pattern that I use either on its own or with a nymph suspended underneath, right? So directly on the shank of the hook itself, on the bend, I'll tie just a improved clinch knot, maybe something like that, and then a foot also, depending on how deep the water is. If the water's not very deep, then I'll persevere and I'll just fish the dry on its own. All right, but it lends itself quite well as a supporter fly as well. Okay. There we go. There's fly number one. Let me just switch back a second. So any questions at that point? I think you've seen clink gammers before, right? So hopefully nothing too new. But again, it's a great pattern for fishing faster waters, pocket water especially. If you're fishing in and around large boulders, things like that. Fast runs as well. It supports. It stays up really well. Yeah, for me, it's one of my go-to patterns, I suppose. Just does it all. So let's have a look. What we're gonna do next. So yeah, that's a caddis emerger then, ideally, or it could be in darker, smaller colors. Again, more like a paradon or parachute emerger. Then it's going to be maybe a terrestrial, something like that, right? But it's going to have broken the surface. It's just more an emerger than anything else. So next up, then we'll continue the sedge theme, and we'll do a really quick fly. And again, I'll just show you how I do it, right? And this is the Cdc and Elk. So bear with one moment. Let me just switch my thread around. Pop it on another bobbin. So this one I'm going to use a 12-aught just because I kind of want to, well, I don't need to waste my 18-aught really. So again, this is nano silk, but in 12. And again, it's white. Most of my thread I use is white. Because again, it takes on the color of the whatever you're tying on top of really. So what we're going to do, so we'll look for, all right, my go-to Cdc and Elk is about a 16, depending on the water I'm fishing, right? So if it's a little bit faster, then again, you can afford to maybe up to a 14, something like that. But on the rivers that I fish, they tend to hover around the 16, maybe 14 size. Okay, so it's you know, they're not too small by any feet. And again, yeah, so Semperfli Nano Silk, nice and strong. It should do the job. We'll talk about these patterns in a bit as well. I've prepped my deer here, so you don't hear too much banging in the stacker, but unfortunately I'm only going to go one stacker, so you're going to get some banging in a bit when I come to the next pattern. So let me just zoom back in, extreme close up. Let's move that around for you. Come on, zoom in. There we go. Okay, so yeah, more of a dry fly, traditional dry fly hook now. This one's a, what are we tying on? Arix dry fly light. Okay, so nice and tough, nice and strong. Okay, that's one of my go-to, or one of my requirements for any of my the hooks that I use. It's got to be strong, and this works quite well. And again, this pattern lends itself well to quick, easy ties when there's a very likely chance that you're going to catch it up in a tree. You're going to have to, you know, pull off, ping off, just the way of it, right? So let me pop the glasses back on, and we'll put the thread on in a second. Okay, so 12-aught this time, so a bit more grunt to it. Oh, yeah, we got one in the waiting room. There we go. Willie's join in. So I'm just going to take the thread now down to just past, or just onto the curve of the bend of the hook, right? Let me just tidy up. Let me just get this some of these things out of the way. It's going to be like a bomb site by the end of the session, no doubt. Right, so this time CDC and Elk. Again, 2 ingredients, right? Nice and simple. But I tell you what, this has got to be one of my favorite patterns. Hans Weilenmann, I believe, came up with this years ago. You can tie it with the wing swept back, tie it with this wing swept forward as more of an emerger. And if you want to split the wing, you can tie it as a spent as well. And I've got a box of just that. All right. So, and again, it's just fun to tie this pattern in different variations, and it'll cover everything, right? So this is going to be like an adult caddis with the wing swept back. But again, I do like tying the emergers with the wing swept forward. It's just a little bit different. But again, it has its place, and it certainly works. So I'm going to take my bag of CDC, and I'm going to find an appropriately sized feather. So bear with me a second. I used to prep my CDC for demos, but you're guaranteed that if you lay it out on the desk, then it's just going to disappear or blow away. So I just keep it in the bag now. Okay. And as nice summers as we've had, I thought, oh, I'll tie some flies out the garden. CDC and Elk isn't the pattern to tie outside, I don't think. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I've got one CDC feather. Okay, nice and simple. That zooms in. What I'm going to do is put it underneath my thread, and I'm just going to lift it up over towards me. Okay, and then I'm just going to just pull my thread back. I'm just going to guide that feather back. Okay, until I've just got a tiniest little nub, and then I'm going to give it a tight turn up. I'm going to slide a lock-in wrap in front of that, and then I'm going to tie forward so that so it disappears into that body. Okay, I'm just going to bring that thread forward and give myself a little bit of space for when I tie the the deer here in. It's actually, you know, as it's called, CDC and Elk, but the original tie-in by Hans was actually deer. Okay, so CDC and deer should be, I suppose. So I'm just going to take a Hackle pliers. I'm just going to start winding that forward. Okay, so the touch and turn, so it forms a nice CDC body. All right, it's going to be a little bit of buoyancy just from that alone. And as you start to get these these fibers, don't trap them down, because what we want to do is brush them back so that they start to form maybe legs or emerging bits, right? Who knows what they are, but it's going to give it a little bit of buoyancy again, just a little bit more surface area. And certainly these little fibers will give us a little bit of ability to. Now, as you get up the top, it almost starts like to act as a hackle, which I'll show you in a second. So I'm just gonna tie that off. And just let you go, my hackle pliers. Okay, so a couple of wraps over the top, and I'm just gonna put a couple of secure wraps under the butt, and one on top again, and then we can just trim off. Let's give that a tidy up. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, look, we've kind of formed the hackle, right? So I'm just going to brush this down. I don't want it to get in the way of the wing, which we'll put on in a minute. We just want to brush that back. So all those legs or hackle fibers are going to give us a nice bit of surface tension, as I mentioned, and also they're going to give us a little bit of movement as well when it's on the water. So let me just sort those out. Right, let me give you a couple of taps. I'm going to put them on mute while I tap, otherwise it's not going to be too good. And there we go. I've got my aligned deer here. Okay, if that wants to zoom in, but you'll see it in a second. So I'm just going to take that out of the stacker. Okay, and I'm gonna line this up, right? So I kind of want the tips to be just past the bend. Okay, if you look at a caddis, the body on it's quite small compared to the wing, so kind of a all wing. And then once I'm happy with the length, I'm just going to swap. Okay, so I'm just going to switch hands, and then I'm going to give it a loose wrap over the top and down. Okay, pinch, and then put my tension on the way up. So that wing's going to flare now. Okay. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull back some of the wing to go through it at about 45 degrees. Okay. And I'm going to lift a whole lot up. And then I'm going to put my secure threads in front. So there's two camps here, right? So let me just tie this off. And there's two camps here that say, oh, you should trim your deer here before you tie it in. Well, yeah, it doesn't work for me. I prefer to do it like this, right? So you tie as you want. What it enables me to do then, once I've snipped off, it's almost started to spin as such, but I'm just gonna sort these butts out. So of course, bring them forward. And then when I'm ready, we're gonna cut at an angle in line with the wing, okay? And I'm just gonna clean that up. And there we go. So we've got a nice 2 material fly, really quick to do. Always takes a little bit longer on a demo, obviously, but yeah, how simple is that? And then from underneath, you've got the nice sort of triangular sort of winged caddis that we all know and love. Yeah, works a treat. And again, easy to tie. If you lose it in the trees, then, you know, hey ho, you've got a box of, I don't know, half a dozen, 2 dozen, and away you go. And again, that'll kind of hold maybe a small nymph, but it's not designed for that. You know, it can fish just as well on faster, turbulent waters because it'll really support itself quite well. Or on the flip side, it'll work well, or just as well in sort of slacker glides as well. But I tell you what, when the caddis are on, works well, but also in the larger hatches. So start of the year when we get the Brookduns, or into spring, sorry, Brookduns, March Browns. I tell you, it works too. And again, as we said, the fish on those smaller waters aren't going to be. They're going to be more opportunistic, right? They're going to eat first, think second, as we say. So yeah, it does cover a broad range. So as long as, again, you don't spook them, yeah, job done. Okay, so that's one Caddis pattern, Cdc and Elk.
Gareth, I have a question, if I may.
Of course, yeah, go for it.
Do you always fish that sort of fly on the streams with such a short leader of 1.5 feet?
Right, let me go back to that. So the 1.5 feet I mentioned is the length I might, if I want to add a nymph to my clink hammer, for example. So my standard sort of leader setup for a small stream is about, I don't know, 8 foot maybe. I'll take a 9 foot tapered leader down to 6x, and I'll take off maybe the top foot, put a perfection loop in, loop to loop on my line, and I'm away. More often than not, I'll put a little tippet ring on the end, and then I'll put my tippet straight onto that, right? So I'm generally fishing about 9 foot. The 1.5 foot I mentioned is when I take my clink hammer, okay, and I tie onto the bend of the hook another 1.5 foot. So it's like trailing. So the clink hammer is going downstream. All right. I'm looking for any dips, nudges. I get taken under. Might be a rock that you tap in with the nymph, maybe. But generally, the nymph will be trailing behind it as it's coming downstream. Okay. So that's the 1.5 foot I mentioned.
Right. Okay.
Okay. But generally, for me, my go-to is a 9 foot leader on a small stream. Any longer than that, it's pointless because you're fishing such smaller water. Anything longer, well, you're not going to load the rod, if I'm honest, because you're fishing like a 14 foot leader, then and with only like a rod's length of line out, the rod ain't going to load. So you're really going to be struggling to smash and over flick, and you're going to get into all sorts of tailor knots and or wind knots. Sorry, you're going to cause that harm. So the good thing these days is, because there's a line for bloody every fishing scenario, right? We all see them, right? We all get the catalog still, and there's way too many lines. The ones I use are the Rio small stream or small creek, but the price, I get a discount, right? So I don't think I would spend the money if I didn't get the discount. But they are exceptional lines. The Barrio small stream is also superb, and considering the difference between, say, Rio, which is like what, £80, even 100 or more these days, compared to was it 30 quid, I think, £28 for a small stream from Barrio, and they are exceptional. They both have the same sort of design. So the head is a lot shorter, but more aggressive. It's almost like a small 2-3 weight Scandi line, where all that weight of the head is in such a small distance on the line. So that the idea being is 30 foot of line is traditionally the AFTM rating, right, on a fly line, and that's what loads the rod, the first 30 foot of line. They're all designed for that. But the small creek, small stream lines are more weight in the front part. Now you could just overline your rod and that will get around it as well, but I like, these are designed for those environments, so they work quite well.
I've never been able to fish a 14 foot leader on my small streams. My rod is 5'6".
Yeah, there you go.
And I probably maximum would be 5 foot or 6 foot length of tippet. And sometimes I lose sight of that. So everybody's different, aren't we?
Yeah, no, that's it. That's it.
Excellent.
Well, that's it. I mean, to start the season, I'll use a 9 weight because there's no need for me to use a 7 foot or smaller. Get away with that. And if anything, when I'm flicking my flies forward, then I'm starting 9 foot in front of me. I can keep low, I can just flick it. Tim, you like the longer rods as well. If you could get away with something like that on a small stream, perfect. But as the foliage explodes, into spring and summer, the longer rods just you can't get away with them. So that's when the smaller rods come out. Yeah, something like a 5.5 foot would be awesome. Bamboo is such a good rod material in those environments because it is softer and it loads a lot more easily. So yeah, bamboo rods in those environments because it's a world of its own, really. Or a good job for good tool for the trade. So Okay, so we're coming up to an hour. I've got a couple more patterns to tie. Probably give you a little bit of time back today because, or we can just have a chat, right? But the next one is another pattern I quite like. Again, it's really buoyant. There's a little bit more going on, so I kind of going against my own rule now of keeping it simple when you can keep things, as simple as they can. There's a little bit more going on, but yeah, we'll give this a try. And it's just a nice pattern to play with as well. I've not done one for a while, so if it goes wrong, then you know why. So we can go up size in our dry fly hooks now. So I'm going to go up to 12 for this one. It's just a bit easier to work with on a camera. So this one's a 12. Okay, let me just swap cameras. 2 seconds. There you go, nice and big. Okay, so after the last demo where we talked about really small patterns, we're going to go against that grain now, and it's going to be a big old caddis. So 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to stick with a 12-aught. Again, I'm going to be tying with more deer here, so I'll just make it a bit easier and simpler, and I'll just enter my thread. I'm going to take that down halfway, snip, and then I'm going to take it down to the bend of the hook, right? So what I'm doing here is laying a base for the deer here I'm about to tie in. So all the way down and then all the way back up. So I'm going to take my, again, deer here. Okay, this is compara done, but you can use elk, you can use just sort of general male, female, whatever you want to use. But as long as it's long enough, okay. So these fibers need to be longer than the hook, okay. I'll show you for why in a second. So I'm just gonna swap to slightly longer deer here. Yeah, there we go. I'm gonna use a elk for this one just to vary it up, and this one is just a bigger patch, right? Let me just zoom or switch cameras. So the comparadon I used for the last one is maybe about an inch, and now I'm going to a general elk, which longer fibers, right? Just makes it easier in this pattern, and you'll see why in a second. So let me just flick back to the fly. Okay, let me just sort this here out. I'm going to take a little selection. This is a size 10, but I don't want too much. Okay, now, as you know, all sort of deer, elk, we got this fluffy stuff, okay, the underfur, which keeps the animal warm. So I'm just gonna remove that. You could use a comb, or I like to give it a good couple of puffs of air. So for that, I'm just gonna go on mute 2 seconds. That's removed. I'm just gonna remove a few fibers because it's a bit thicker clump, and then I'm gonna pop it into my stacker. And again, one of the reasons we remove the underfur is because it just doesn't stack when it's got all that fur underneath it. So just gonna give this a couple of taps. Just go on mute a second. I don't want to annoy you all. And that's done. And if you're tying caddis late at night, you're guaranteed to annoy the neighbors. Okay, so what have we got? Okay, so I've got a large bunch. Okay, so what I want to do now is line this up. So again, just about past the length of the hook. Okay, so that I'm happy with that. What we're going to do now is I'm going to give it, again, loose over the top and then pull down. And then in open sort of wraps, I'm going to start coming back and I'm going to tie this down because this is going to be the body, the head, and the tail. If you catch any down in, don't worry. I certainly don't care. Okay, so bring that all the way out of the way. If you've got any fibers sticking back, just pull them back out of the way. Okay, and then back up to the head. Now I'm not going to trim yet, because I'm going to trim that at the very end when I'm ready to do the head. Okay, so I'm just going to give it a couple of loose wraps with the idea that it's going to hold those forward. Yeah, that's a bit better. Again, just start to tidy up that body. So as you can imagine, I've created a cork here, right? This isn't going to sink. And you might wonder what the hell it's supposed to represent, but it is a caddis. So, okay, so I'm quite happy with that. This gets a bit annoying because it's in the way, but we've got a really buoyant tail. Well, it's not a tail. Caddis don't have tails, do they? But it's the back end of the wing, essentially. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is just tidy this up. Again, synthetic thread, so I'm not too worried. If I got a bit of build up, then it's not going to take on too much water. Okay, so next up, we're gonna sort of palmer a hackle. So we're gonna need a rib to tie that down. Okay, so on my desk, I've got some fine gold wire, which I'm going to use. So I'm going to tie that down at the butt. Okay, so there's my wire. Again, you can use thread if you want, whatever. Okay, I'm just going to bring this forward. And at the head, so I'm just going to park that out of the way. And at the head, I'm going to tie, I don't know, what have I got here? Is that going to be long enough? No. No. Let's go back with the cream. Yeah, that's better. That's cool. Okay, so I'm just going to take that and tie it in. Again, we're going to be tying this backwards, right? So in order to palmer it, essentially. Just make sure that's tied in nice and tight. I don't want that slipping out after doing all the hard work. And then take it back down. Now at this point, there's loads of options around, you know, what sort of body you want, right? So I'm going to tie an underbody of a dubbed underbody. Now you can use whatever you want for this. What shall we use? I think I've got, yeah, we'll just go back to the super fine stuff, right? It's only an underbody, so it doesn't need to be sort of crazy fluffy or anything. Again, I don't want it to be too spiky because, well, that's the role of the hackle, right? So again, super fine. That's gonna work fine for me. I'm gonna go for something like rust this time. I like the way the orange caddis kind of looks sometimes. So I'm just gonna again form a dubbing rope. Again, we're not looking for a taper with this one, right? Because it's caddis, it doesn't really have a taper. It's not a ephemera such. So I'm just going to bring that forward. Again, this super fine's a bit loose, so it needs a bit of tightening as you go. As you can see. So I'm just going to wind that forward. And all we're doing here is just giving it a bed, right, for the hackle to sit on. We're going to cover that up in a second. Yeah, judge that well. Okay, so next up is our hackle. Okay, just gonna let me just get that thread out of the way. Why is that there? Okay, couple of wrap and then palmer it as we go. Okay, so nice sort of open loops, wraps rather. And then when you're at the back, we're going to switch hands, and then we're going to tie that effectively down with our wire. Okay, and then we're going to rib nice open turns coming forward. So what I like to do is give it a wiggle through, because I don't want to trap any of that, any of those hackles down. So we'll give it a wiggle through the hackles, and they kind of like just fall out of the way. God, I haven't done one of these for a while. If it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong now. So, okay, so when we're back at the head, give yourself a loop over. Once that's tied in, now you can lift everything out of the way. I'm keeping the wire forward, so I keep tying over the top of it. Okay, and then lift it all out of the way. Give yourself a nice pat in the back because it hasn't gone wrong. So then here's my hackle pliers, and I'll just tie that off. We're not done just yet, right? So I'll just clean this up slightly. So we've got a few things going on now to clean up. Obviously, we've got the wire, so let me just give that a wiggle. So that just snaps off on its own. We've got the hackle still there. Okay, so again, you can either trim, or if it's tied down well enough, you could just ping that off, but I'm not going to do that in the demo because that's only going to bite me. And then we're going to take all of the head, bring that forward again. And again, cut a nice big head in. I'm just going to tidy that up slightly. So again, this is I'll tell you what, it's floats like a cork. Again, you can use this as a bit of a indicator fly if you wanted to. Okay. And then lastly, now you can fish it like that if you wanted to. But the original is, it kind of sits in or very close to the film. So what we do, I'm going to take our scissors and I'm just going to cut horizontally, trim all of those hackle fibers off from underneath. So if you've ever seen like a super pupa, it's a pattern that kind of gives a similar footprint to this, like a Griffith's gnat, but sort of trimmed. Okay, so hopefully you can see that underneath. Look, I've not got many fibers. Maybe there's one or two there, which show up on camera. Swine of a camera, and there we go. It's pretty flat underneath. So if I just that in the vice slightly from underneath, you can see a hell of a footprint there. With the tail, we've got the nice floating head as well. Give it a bit of grease maybe on the hackle. Doesn't need much because it's just going to float on its own anyway. Again, color, does it really matter? I don't think so. The wire is not going to add much weight, but you could use thread if you're really worried about it. But again, the direct or animal, great Norwegian pattern, and it yeah, I tell you what, the fish don't really see many of them, so I don't know, they tend to have a bit of confidence when these are fished. They do work well. So again, give it a go. Bit more fiddly, and as I say, I've kind of broken my own rule there of keeping things simple by tying that one. But again, it's got its place, right? And it on small streams and on main stems, they do work very well. So have a play and let me know how you get on with them. So I'm just gonna take that out of the vise a second. Keep my camera on there while I set up the next one. So what I'm gonna do with the next one, so this is the last fly, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about them all. So, oh my God, Gareth tying a nymph. Who'd have thought? Right. So this one, again, nice strong hook. Bead is about 2.5 mil. And again, I don't tend to fish nymphs much through the year. I might switch to them in the winter when I'm fishing for grayling, obviously, but it's few and far between, really. Throughout the trout season, I'll really only fish dry flies. But if things are tough, certainly on small streams, and I want to prospect, and I want to search out some, honey holes, then I'll pop a nymph on underneath. So it's about a 2.5 mil bead. Nice strong hook again, because if I'm going to be catching a rock or a stick or a branch or whatever that's underneath, again, they're not, there's a lot of debris in the small streams. Then again, I don't want it to, well, it's going to ping off probably before the hook pings, but or the hook bends. So I'm just going to grab a couple of materials. If you bear with me just a moment. So this one's going to be kind of a gold ribbed hazier-esque pattern. And there we go. So this is a snowshoe rabbit foot hazier blend. Okay, loads of different nice spiky bits and different colored bits, some softer bits. It's got it all that. This is a Nature Spirit one, but you know, there's loads out there. Use if you want, you can use Haze Mask. It's just a good pattern for this, really. So I've got that. Yeah, we're good to go. So I'm going to go back to 18/0, just a bit thinner. Again, it's a smaller hook, size 16 with a 2.5mm bead. And I'll just pop the thread on here, nice and tight to the bead. And what we'll do, that'll stop spinning around in a bit once we get the materials on there. So I'm not too worried about tying it into place. I'll come back to that. Okay, so I'll just start to form a bit of a taper on the front end. And what I'll do next is straight away move the hook in the vise. Okay, so I'm going to tie down again, size 16 nymph. Yeah, it's not going to be massive, but I don't really care about that. I just want the bead to take it down, and you can fish the quite small patterns with a appropriately sized bead. Okay, so for this one, it's going to have a tail. So I'm going to use Coq de Leon. Again, not a huge number of fibers. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fibers, which I'll show you in a moment. Okay, so all lined up. Again, I'm just going to tie this in really long. Nice loose wrap over the top to start with, and just one to hold it in place. And then again, just leave the bobbin, put the pressure on, right? And then I'm just going to pinch the ends, and I'm just going to push with my other hand until I'm happy with the length of the tails. Is that all right? Okay. Now I'm going to put the pressure on, tie forward. Now I'm not going to snip at any point until I get to the head, because again, I'm going to incorporate that into the body and the taper, right? Make it nice and sexy taper, and then there I'm going to snip off. So now I'm going to go back to my wire from earlier. And I'm going to tie that in next. Give me a second, let me tidy this up. So this bit I'm going to insert into the bead. I'm just going to tie that in. So it's going to kind of start to hold that in place now. Okay, so I'm going to tie that down till about halfway. Then I'm going to get, where was that? Don't want that, don't want that. Want. Yeah, I'll do. So what I'll do, I'll take the same sort of material I had earlier. When I had a little bit of flash this time, right? So I'm going to take sort of a decent length, maybe about 6, 7 inches. I'm just going to double it up, right? So I'll show you in a second. Double it and then double again. And at the ends. And I'm going to tie that on directly on top now. Okay, now I'm tying back up to the head again. The idea here is to continue that taper. And I'm going to tie that back down to hold the rib and my flash, but I want the flash to be positioned on top, right? So what I'm going to do is pull this back over when I'm done, and that's going to be like my flashback. So all the way down. There we go. me just get that rib out of the way. Okay, so nearly there. Again, this is a quite simple tie. Want it to be. Again, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start to tease out some of this. So this is as I say, this dubbing rope is going to be a mix of snowshoe rabbit foot and hare's ear. Okay, so you've got lots of stuff going on in here. It's great stuff. So again, nice and thin at the tail or the butt. So I'm just going to catch that in. Then maybe put a bit more pressure on just to tease those fibers out. And then touch in, turns forward. So what we're looking for now is a bit more spikiness, right? You can sort of rub this up with Velcro if you want, or you can just leave it do its thing, or you can pick things out later on with a bodkin or needle. And then if you need to, just add a little bit more on. You just form another dubbing rope. What I'm looking for is a bit of a taper here now, right? Because again, this could be an emerging ephemera, or it could actually be a sedge. Could be anything. What's a gold ribbed hare's ear, right? It's like what's a pheasant tail? That's never seen a hatch of pheasant tails. So I'll stop about there. And what I'll do at this point is pull over the flash, and I want that to sit on top, right? So I'll just give it a loose turn first. And I'm just checking now that that's sat directly over the back, okay? And then I can put a firmer turn, tie that down properly. Okay, so if I looked at that from behind, should be over the back, okay? Again, this will slip slightly, but we're going to tie it down with our rib in a second. So it's getting a bit short, so I'm going to use Hackle pliers on this bit. There you go. And now what we're going to do is, again, counter wrap. Now, if I put too much pressure on, what's going to happen is I'm going to pull that back in the direction that I'm tying. So I'm not going too heavy-handed. Again, just going to pull that forward. Again, you can open up the segments as you come forward if you want a bit more natural. Do the fish care? Don't they? Maybe they do. Who knows? I don't. Okay, and then just put a couple of wraps on, and then we'll tie that off. Okay, and that is the body done. So again, the light's not great on this camera, but what I'll do, I'll take the normal pictures, right? So we've got a little bit of flash on the back, and then just a spiky body. Now at this point, I'll maybe give it a couple of go in with the needle and just tease a couple of fibers out. I don't want it fluffy as, because it's going to slow the descent down. Again, I want this pattern to drop like a rock. Okay, that's that done. I'm just going to move that in the vise slightly. So we've got the tail in. We've got a rib, which you can't really see because of the light and the camera, but you can certainly see the flash of that back. So the idea that with that being is maybe an extra trigger, just something for the fish to lock onto if they see it. If I'm fishing it as a part of a duo rig, so underneath the clink hammer, then what might happen is they might actually, the flash might frighten them away from the nymph, but then they might see the dry, which is suspended above it. So that's the idea. Now you could put at this point like a thorax cover in if you wanted to. I never bother really. So what I'm going to do is just going to split my thread. And even in the 18-0, it's not too hard to do, he says as he struggles. There we go. Hope and wish for the best. So I'm going to do now, I'm going to use the same stuff. You could use some in spike gear if you want to do, like squirrel or whatever. I'm just going to use the same dubbing. Again, it's got some nice guard hairs in there. So they'll act as a nice spiky thorax. Okay, so I'm just going to sort that out, just make sure it's even. And then I'm just going to spin that back. So I've unspun it, popped my needle in to split it. I've inserted a little bit of pinch dubbing, and now I'm spinning it back, and you'll see that start to twist around. A second. There we go. And what I'm going to do now, as I'm winding forward, I'm just going to brush back with my fingers. There we go. And that, my friends, is a nice, easy gold ribs hairs here. So you can see how simple it would be to do pheasant tail, right? You just substitute the dubbed body for pheasant tail, and away you go, and that's pretty much it. And they'll both give similar sort of aspects. I'm just going to take my dubbing brush. Just going to stroke these back, give it a bit of a brush up. So we've got loads of movement going on here, and this is pretty much even in trout season, right? In winter, I use, you know, obviously heavier tungsten. This is a 2.5, so I'll use 3 and 4s. And God, if I'm out fishing and I need 5 mils, then something's going on. But generally, that is my kind of go-to trout nymph. All right, nice and simple. Loads of buggy stuff going on with it. Could be a caddis, could be, you know, just a mess of ephemera mess. Yeah, it does it all for me. And in size 16s, that's kind of my go-to as well. Certainly for the small streams I fish, you don't really need to get down too deep, because, well, you know, they're not deep streams themselves. So yeah, that's it for me this evening. Really, I only wanted to finish on. So those 4 flies. Then we tied the clink hammer. We tied a Cdc and Elk. So you're kind of covering one emerger and then 1 adult sort of caddis. If you wanted to, I'd probably add a paradon as well to this, right? So it's, you know, more of an ephemera, but adult or dun, or spinner even. So those are my kind of 5 really. The next then was the direct or animal, the big sort of big footprint, sort of caddis, right? Big footprint, nice and buoyant. Don't be afraid to go too large with those, because they will come up and grab them. And then lastly, yeah, the final one, which is the nymph, which does get you out of jail sometimes as well when you're fishing more pocket water. And I find most fish anyway will come up to a clink hammer or a dry fly in small streams. But if it is a particularly tough day, then yeah, I'll just make it a little bit easier. And of course, because I've got to wade through these pools, I'd rather fish through them properly than actually, you know, I'm not able to get out and walk around. So yeah, it's you know, I'll fish through. If it is a tougher day, I'll put the nymph on. Gear wise, as we said, I tend to use a 9-foot in the start of the season when the trees haven't blown out yet, because I can get away with it. Obviously, the longer reach gives me a bit more better ability to mend my line when it's on the water, and also to flick out a little bit easier when I'm fishing a duo as well. I can sort of high stick it, or similar to how we fish maybe with Euro tactics and French leaders and things. But then as the season does blow the trees out and they come into full bloom, then I'll use a 7-foot 2/8. Yeah, love it. It's great. You're back to, you know, quite tight loops and fast casts and things, just to try and get it under trees and next to logs and all this sort of stuff, and it works well again. So yeah, but yeah, small streams is great fun, but you do come back feeling a bit bruised sometimes after, you know, crawling around and bent over all day, and yeah, it can be tough work. I'm feeling it more the older I get, put it that way. So but that's it for me. Any questions, or did anybody want to ask anything, have a chat about anything?
No, very, very good, Gareth. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Cheers, man.
Good stuff. Hope you enjoyed it, and
Thank you very much.
thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thanks very much.
No worries.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Gareth.
Yeah, cheers, Gareth.
Me £1,000 for my time, Gareth.
Have you stopped the recording, guys?
I will.